Good afternoon. I just want to talk a little bit about a topic that I have been thinking about could make a documentary film, and I'm going to talk about it in two parts. And the first part is more abstract. I want to talk about the idea of natural rights for individuals and the idea that we don't always follow them when we have to execute public policy during hard times and serious challenges like war or right now the pandemic. So I want to just talk about what the principles of this are, because what we regard as natural rights and moral responsibilities of individuals don't necessarily track to what we would desire as public policies in a liberal democracy, where generally, as a matter of law, or constitutional law, or we try to set up fundamental rights, like in the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendments and so forth, that are generally nearly always honored, or supposed to be honored, but sometimes they don't hold up when society becomes extremely unstable or when it becomes threatened by natural disaster or by war or by enemies and so forth. And so how people behave when there is adversity is a big deal, and that's a big test of anyone's character as to whether they can come through in adversity. So that's the way it really is. So you kind of have to separate the two between what an individual is responsible for doing when he's challenged or they are challenged, and what the overall policies normally are when law and order is normally working properly. So yeah, I think when things change, individuals have to change their behavior with it, and that becomes a very serious test of their character. Now, for me, loss of personal agency as an individual is a very big deal. Now, here are the examples that would challenge a person's normal fundamental rights: war from an external enemy, with military conscription being one of the biggest issues. Remember how it was during the Vietnam War, when we had a male-only draft and we had student deferments until 1969, when we went to a lottery. But that was very divisive. It also tended to be worse for people of color, of course, and it kind of fed this idea that you could get out of the draft if you were smarter and a better student and kind of had a higher place in society. You could somehow to get out of a risk that other people had to take. It was a very divisive thing, and I went through basic training after I got my master's in math, and I found out, just what it was really like, what it felt like, and some of that is coming back today. The second thing, of course, is the pandemic. I also wanted to add that a lot of people didn't think the war in Vietnam was necessary. Maybe it wasn't, but it may have been a break to have conventional forces that may have been a strong deterrent against nuclear war. So I think that's something we should remember. The coronavirus, obviously the SARS, COVID disease, it has hampered people coming together indoors in large families and households. It's also seriously undermined what people normally think is their right to privacy within a family, because government is making rules about how many people you can have in your own home at a time, or how many households can come together, and normally that would violate any natural idea of a right of privacy as a fundamental right, except that as such, the right of privacy isn't really defined as a fundamental right in a formal way in the Bill of Rights anyplace. It actually isn't. That's something I proposed in my first Do Ask, Do Tell book. But anyway, it's rather shocking. And also, the idea of lockdowns, the idea that they should be much stricter than they have been in the United States, so you could wipe the virus down to zero, which is not very practical. In the United States, even in Europe, that really wasn't done. And states in the United States are more or less like countries in Europe. There's some question as to whether that was really even done in China. But that's something that's been said. But if you really had a very hard lockdown that was as extreme as it could go and challenged people just to get by on their wits and not go out at all for several weeks and survive on their own, even shut down the internet, absolutely shut down everything, then for example, my own sites and so forth wouldn't survive, and I doubt I would be allowed back on. And that's why it's something we'll talk about later. HIV was problematic when it came back in the 1980s because it was fed by mostly by one specific behavior among gay men, and then later by drug use and so forth, and some other things. But it was very circumscribed in who it could affect because it wasn't transmitted by casual contact. Nevertheless, the religious right tried to make us to speculate about it and claim that what happens if it turns into an arbovirus and becomes transmissible by mosquitoes, then isn't the behavior of gay men jeopardizing all of us? Well, I don't think any virus that isn't transmitted by insects ever has suddenly become such. There was Zika virus, which turned out not to be as bad as might have been. It's transmitted sexually and by some contact, not really by casual contact, but there was some concern about Zika's being spread that way, but that has kind of become less of a concern. The long-term consequences of this are very serious. We may never go back to living just the way we did. A lot of things, just like the baths went away after AIDS, it may be that bars and discos never really will recover. I hope they do. But even though staying at home is very good for people who are sort of isolated socially like me, introverts, it may be that people have to be much more local and be better able to function in family groups and in communities and be much more effective socially than simply go off on their own, kind of go MGTOW like I did. And so this could really be bad in the long run for somebody like me. And the other thing, of course, is that other disasters like wildfires and floods and hurricanes, those also can challenge personal agency.